Hi, I'm Doug from Dynamic Computing and welcome to episode 147 of 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast. As you may have heard, there's been a new release of Amiga OS 3.2, which is 3.2.2. Our wonderful devs who started out with Amiga OS 3.1.4 have been updating it, bug fixing it, and patching it for the past couple of years, and the new update is available to registered owners today. Of course, Hyperion Entertainment is the actual distributor of the software, so you can go to their website, and the link is right in the description if you'd like a little bit more information about what's in that. So what do you need for Amiga OS 3.2.2 update? Well, you need at least Amiga OS 3.2. And where can you buy that with your hard-earned money? You can get that from our friends like Retro Rewind, Steve from retropassion.uk, and our good friends at amigastore.eu, and there are several others, and I'll try to link to some of the others in the description too. And remember, we're not pimply-faced 14-year-old kids anymore. Just buy the software. Don't pirate it. Don't be that guy. Just don't. Now you can find links to my other videos that talk about Amiga OS 3.1.4, 3.2, and 3.2.1 right there in a playlist to browse at your convenience. But in a nutshell, what the new Amiga OSs do, number one, they squash a ton of bugs that have been sitting on Amiga OS 3.1 for decades. Number two, they try to make things a little faster by optimizing the code. Several of the important utilities have been recoded in much faster language, so they're not still running on some old stuff that Commodore did back in the 80s and 90s. And they try to make it a little bit more modern while still keeping the authentic look of the Amiga OS workbench, which in my opinion still can look pretty darn good. Several of the tools and utilities that a lot of us would download over the years to enhance the Amiga OS, like directory viewers, text editors, things like that, all of those things are now included in the new version of Amiga OS 3.2.2, and it's really nice to have it all right there in front of you. To be perfectly honest, when I go back and use an Amiga OS 3.1 installation, I always feel like something's missing. I go to do something like, I'll just go to, oh, that's right, it's not here. I really like it. Now, to get this new update, you have to be a registered owner of Amiga OS 3.2. Then you go to Hyperion's website, again, the link's in the description, and log into their website with your account. Then you go to the downloads link and you'll see a link that says Amiga OS 3.2. Click on that. There's the 3.2.2 update right there. It's an LHA file, which is 16.5 megs, which is a fairly decent sized file for an Amiga. Go ahead and download that. Now the good news is this also works from iBrowse if your Amiga is connected to the network. You can just go to iBrowse on your internet-enabled Amiga, go to Hyperion's website, log in, download it right from there. Works absolutely perfectly. But how do you get this download over to your Amiga if your Amiga is not internet-enabled? Well, let me give you a few tips. Number one, if you've got an Amiga 600 like my little guy down here, those have, and the Amiga 1200 have, the PCMCIA socket. Just get yourself one of the PCMCIA to CF adapters, download the drivers required to get it to be recognized. Use less than a 4 gig CF card. Pop it on there, take it right on over. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. If you've got a Gotek device, which a lot of us do to replace our failing floppies, just take your flash drive for your Gotek device, bring it over to your PC, and you can either decompress it in WinUAE and then copy it over, or use the free 7-zip program on that's available for Windows that will decompress LHA archives, and you can just drag and drop the little ADF files right to your Gotek, boot up your machine, tell the Amiga to use them as files, you're golden. If you have one of Kiefer's amazing grease weasel devices, here's a link to a video I did on it. That actually lets you use an Amiga or a PC floppy right on this little interface board that connects to USB, and you can write Amiga floppies right from your PC. So you could make actual floppy disks from it if you have spare floppies, no problem at all. And if your Amiga's networked, but you don't have eyebrows, you can use an FTP program and FTP them directly to your computer. Here's a link right there to my FTP video. Or you can use the new SMB 2 and 3 drivers that I talked about a few weeks ago in one of my videos. Map a network drive, copy it over, bing, bang, boom. Lastly, most of us are using like CF card adapters as hard drives in our Amiga, something like that. Pop the thing out of your Amiga, pop it onto your Windows machine. You can get the IDE to USB interfaces. They're like 20 bucks. Boot the darn thing right in WinUAE. Boot your actual hard drive in WinUAE. Run the update there. Then disconnect it, put it back in your Amiga. Done. There's so many ways that we can transfer data between our PCs and Mac machines and our Amiga machines. It's just incredible what we can do now. So now that we have our 16 megabyte LHA file copied to the CF card that's currently in the PCMCA socket of my Amiga 600, that's a lot of acronyms. Let's go ahead and get it decompressed and see what we need to do. Follow me. So what we're going to do first is we're just going to copy these update files right over to my Amiga 600. Of course, I could decompress them and use them right on this CF card, but I want the files on the Amiga anyways. So we're just going to take it and we're going to drag and drop it on over. Let's go inside and download the LHA file itself. Already decompressed. Yay, Doug. We'll just move the whole thing right over to the Amiga 600. Okay, we've got those transferred over. Now I'm sure many of you are wondering about if we require brand new ROMs to use Amiga OS 3.2.2, or can you use your existing ROM? Well, the good news is you can absolutely use your existing ROM without any issue at all. Even your old 3.1 ROM will actually work. Now, if we go in this update 3.2.2 directory, you're going to see a list of ROMs for all of the standard models of the Amiga. 1200, 3000, 4000, and here's the 500, 600, and 2000 ROMs right here. Now notice there's two different kinds, a high, a low, and one called .rom. There's a reason for that. These two, the high and low, are designed to be burned to actual physical ROMs, okay? So you can use these to legally burn them to an actual ROM if you have a ROM burner. These are designed to be used with the operating system and used like with an accelerator, like an ACA 500 Plus or my Classic 520 or a Vampire. You use these ROMs, 512K ROMs, to flash the flash memory in your accelerator and use your ROM that way. You also use these, the .ROMs, for like WinUAE. Of course, there's advantages to using a new 3.2.2 ROM. It will prevent a reboot at startup, and it saves a bit of RAM that you would normally have to use to virtually update your old ROM, and some bug fixes. So let's talk about some of these bug fixes, and these are generally implemented even when you're not using a physical ROM. Now, first off, graphics library here is updated and it's fixing a slight error, has to do with calculating colors and trashing 8 bytes of memory. So they fixed the graphics library. Next, DOS library and RAM handler are fixed right here. And it changes the way that envarc and the environment variables work and how these preferences are copied over to your hard drives. Now, set patch is also fixed. So you've got this argument in there called a no drive LED patch. It relates to using an optical drive on your Amiga, and sometimes when you would use it, it would keep the IDE patch or the IDE light on all the time, and this little patch fixes it, and they've got a different way for it to work. Now, there's also some fixes to DOS library as far as redirecting some stuff, but the most important thing is that the Amiga OS ROM 3.2 had a serious bug in it where if you tried to boot and you did not have a hard drive or a floppy drive connected, it would give you a blank screen. Even though Kickstart was working perfect, it just would not display the disk animation for it. This fixes it, but only if you're using an actual physical ROM. Now, some dealers will burn you the new ROM, some of those nice dealers I talked about earlier. All you have to do is send them an email if you bought the software from them, or if you can prove you bought the software, and they will burn you a new ROM for a very reasonable price. Now, next up, we're going to be upgrading my Amiga 600 on here. This has the 3.2 ROM in it, and I'm not going to do a physical ROM upgrade today. What you want to do is you want to open up your updates folder and go to ADFs. Now, of course, Amiga OS 3.2 has this cool feature where you can actually double click on an ADF file and it will actually mount it right on your computer, which is really, really cool. You see, as soon as I clicked update 3.2.2, it actually puts a drive icon down here. Now, for you nerdy folks, that drive icon, the Amiga thinks that it is just a normal drive, and it can be accessed with DA0 instead of DF0, so it's DADF0. And as you mount additional drives, there'll be DA1, DA2, etc. It's really kind of cool. So we go to updates 3.22, and you see there's a nice folder called install here. We're going to go to install, and we're going to do English. I recommend that you do intermediate on here. Novice user apparently does not update the ROMs properly. So we're going to go proceed with install and install for real. 3.22 will be installed. Any previous 3.21 files will be replaced. Do we want to install it in the Workbench partition? Yes. We're going to do it in English again. Now here, this is critically important. Should the following files be moved to the Workbench 600 old drawer? Workbench startup sequence. Yeah, that sounds reasonable. It backs up your startup sequence in case you have anything custom there. But therein lies the problem. If you go and we look at our Workbench here, if you already have a folder on your Workbench disk called old in here, and you've already updated from 3.2 to 3.21, you have an old folder, you have a backed up startup sequence in there, very possibly. This does not overwrite it, nor does it warn you about it. So the mistake I made on my Amiga 4000, I said, oh yeah, great, move, I got some custom stuff in there. And it goes and does its thing. And it goes and here's the wonder of Amiga multitasking. It creates this little folder called old, and it puts your startup sequence in there. Problem is, if there's already a startup sequence in that folder, it does not back it up, and you lose all of the custom stuff in your startup sequence, and you have to try and remember what you had in there. The key is go into this old folder before you do the update, delete the old startup sequence from the old folder, not from startup sequence, not from S, but from the old folder, then it will update everything just fine. Now I think that bug could be fixed if in the install script they just modify it and do a force at the end or an overwrite, or if it detects there's already a startup sequence in the old folder, just add a 1 on the end of it so you have multiple copies. This shouldn't be that hard for them to fix. Now, when you get to the end here, it's going to ask you what kind of hardware model you have. Now be careful here. Mine's an Amiga 600, totally accurate. Yesterday I upgraded this on my Amiga 500 that has Linux Jedi's Ramses board in it, which gives you 2 megabytes of chip RAM. It identified that machine as an Amiga 600. And let me tell you, that Amiga 500 was terribly offended by that. Now, would it have worked anyways? Very likely. The A600 does have some extra code for the IDE devices, but it very likely would have worked. But it did detect it incorrectly, so double check and make sure you're using the wrong one. We're going to go ahead and choose proceed here. It's loading the modules disk and installing and updating the ROM virtually. Installation of update 3.22 is complete. You must reboot your Amiga, remove the disks and select proceed. Since these are virtual disks, we don't need to remove them. We're just going to reboot and then take a look. Now my reboot took a few seconds extra because I'm now patching my 3.2 ROM with 3.22 code. So it takes an extra few seconds as it patches it and resets the vectors to point at a different place, and bing, bang, boom. But look what we've got here. Copyright 2023 Hyperion Entertainment. That's kind of cool. And if we go to Help and About, it should show our newer versions of Kickstart on here. I should say 47.111, but it says 47.102. I'm going to have to check into that, but it is upgraded to 3.2.2. Now, you're not going to see any, besides these things right here, any physical differences. Everything looks pretty much the same. Everything runs pretty much the same. So let's dig into some of the things that have changed with 3.2.2. So this 3.2.2 update must have done something to the operating system. So let's go over a couple of the things that it affects. First of all, text edit, the really nice text editor. I recommend you guys start using that if you haven't used it yet. There's been some improvements to its interface that's got an about menu item. It's got a really cool AREX port built into it, so you can start interchanging data between TextEdit and other programs. I really have to do an AREX video one of these days. I just have to. But there's a bug with TextEdit that we'll talk about in a minute. Now, ShowConfig, that great program that shows you the configuration of your Amiga that's been so enhanced with 3.2, now shows you the revision number of your 68060 CPU. So you can see if it's a Rev 1, Rev 5, Rev 6, whatever. The problem is, on standard Amiga screen modes, it cuts it off. So you'll see 68060 Rev parentheses, and then it's cut off. On an RTG screen, you can widen it up and see what it is, but it's totally useless on a regular Amiga screen because you just can't see it. You can always use the CPU command and the shell and see what Rev you have, but I think they'll fix that bug. Icon Edit, that's the program that allows you to, imagine this, edit icons, has received some major overhauls. It's always been one of the Amiga strengths to be able to edit icons and change them to whatever you want to, but now they've modernized it, they've updated it, they've made it faster in some situations, but it also suffers from a pretty severe bug that I'll talk about in a second. Sketchboard Gadget has received some updates. That's going to speed up some things with that involve graphics and palettes like Icon Edit. There's been some changes to Intuition, where it detects if you've got a different kind of mouse pointer on there. It'll look for changes in your mouse pointer when you press Shift, Alt, or Control. It's got some new features to do some different things with that. AREX class, it now can share the same signal with several message ports, which sounds kind of cool. It sounds like we're able to send an AREX command to multiple things at a time, which might be kind of cool. Let's look into that a little more. The boards.library, that's the thing in ShowConfig that shows you what kind of boards you have set up in your computer. If you have a Zorro system, you may have a sound card, you may have an accelerator, and your Amiga 600 or 1200, you might have an accelerator or some extra RAM. It does a better job of identifying those and telling you what they are. It's just been updated. It's kind of cool. There's a list browser gadget that's been updated, making it much smaller and a bit faster, which is kind of cool. Faster's better. Layout gadget has had a complete overhaul. Windows class has had a complete overhaul. A lot of these, what they do is they just almost start from scratch. They take the basis of the code and they're like, okay, let's redo this in a more modern language, more streamlined, make it faster, make it smaller. Cool stuff. And the RAM disk has a complete overhaul. Complete, they say. So it's much less likely to cause issue. Now, I've been looking around to see what kind of issues there were with the RAM disks and what this solves, and I can't find exactly what they're talking about, but I'm really curious what improvements they've made to the RAM disk. I mentioned the TextEdit AREX port. A couple other programs have a new AREX port. The CD file system has a new feature, so it properly reflects the resident tag. Apparently that accidentally got removed, and now it reflects the resident tag. The show config, we've already mentioned it. The GUI has been extended to show much more detailed information regarding memory, expansion devices, libraries. Basically, show config has finally become, with version 3.2 and above, a really, really useful utility to use. We mentioned icon edit getting updated. That's awesome. Workbench has a new menu item. Now 3.2 had this, that allows you to eject disks. It's mainly designed originally to eject ADF disks that the Amiga OS mounts itself. Now they've enhanced that where it will work with other devices like CD-ROMs and DVDs and things like that. And they're continuing to enhance it to include more devices that the Amiga can send an eject signal to. Kind of cool. There's a fix to Workbench Info, WB Info, and it can invoke and display Workbench icon information. You know how you click an icon, you go to the tool or the menu, you select information. Now apparently what you can do, you can retrieve that information from icons in other ways, which is kind of cool. Locale library has a very important bug fix that apparently was causing some issues. The execute command that was in the C: folder has been replaced. Some software won't install if the execute command's not there. I don't think it ever should have been taken out. This is a key one. Clipboard device. That's been fixed. It had a bug since 3.1.4 that could prevent copying clips above 16 kilobytes. Now, 16 kilobytes is actually a fair amount of text, but if you're copying things that include other things besides text, you could get past that 16 kilobyte limit pretty quick. They apparently fixed it, so now it copies and pastes properly with even larger files. iPrefs has been fixed. There was a bug in there where sometimes you'd use iPrefs and Workbench would think there was a window open and it would try to reset the window, and it said, oh, you can't reset it because there's a window open. You've seen that dialog box. They fixed that up. They fixed some things with the find command, which is cool. They fixed some things with icon library, which is cool. And Workbench library has received many fixes to Windows and drawer management, which is nice because those needed some touching up. Reaction, which is one of the interfaces that Amiga OS 3.2 and above uses, which makes things really pretty. It's kind of like MUI in a way, and hopefully now more things will switch over to using a reaction interface in addition to or replacing the MUI interface. But a bunch of the different reaction things like click tab, integer, layout, all those little gadgets and stuff have been updated, and so they should run more efficiently. But have any bugs been introduced with 3.2.2? Yeah, they have. Now, my friend Kevin Bryce pointed this out to me Saturday. He messaged me and said that on a 68,000 CPU with this new 3.2.1 update, 3.2.2 update, TextEdit and icon edit and maybe multi-view receive a huge slowdown. I mean, it's really, really noticeable. Not just, oh, it's inconvenient. It's noticeable. To the point where the mouse jumps around like crazy. So I did a little before and after video of my Amiga 500, a little shaky cam video. So just pretend you're watching Cloverfield or something, of Amiga OS 3.2.1 TextEdit versus 3.2.2 TextEdit and how the speed differences are. So take a look at that. So let's put this theory to the test. Here we are on my Amiga 500. There she is with my ACA 500 Plus. Lovely little card. Set to 7 megahertz. So we're running at the standard 7 megahertz speed on here. We're going to check the performance of the machine with TextEdit at 7 megahertz on Amiga OS 3.2.1 versus 3.2.2 and see if we really do have an issue. Let's check it out. Now, that's a pretty dramatic difference if you ask me. That mouse just jip, 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 jip. We're not used to that. I mean, Atari ST, okay, yeah, you jerky mouse and slow performance. Amiga, eh-eh. Now, I have some thoughts about it. Maybe some of the new reaction interfaces, because as I just mentioned, they just fixed and replaced a bunch of those. Maybe they recompiled some of them in 68020 instead of 68,000 code. So when it hits 68,000, it goes, what the heck? And it has a hard time dealing with it. Or something similar, something maybe not compiled quite right. So we may find more reaction-based programs on a 68,000 CPU running incredibly slowly. And we can't have that. Now, honestly, if they came out with a version of Amiga OS that said, this requires a 68020 or better processor and 8 megabytes of RAM, okay, that's fine. Tell us that it requires that. Don't just, put a product out there that stops working on a 68,000 and don't mention it. That's why I think it's just a little bug fix, and they just need to tweak something and get that working properly again. Now, even when I crank my ACA 500 Plus from 7 megahertz that I did in my test up to 21 megahertz, it helps, but it's still chuggity chug 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 on TextEdit. Should this prevent you from upgrading your machine to 3.2.2? No. This should prevent you from upgrading your 68,000 based machine right this minute. Wait until they fix those bugs and then upgrade. You got a faster CPU? It runs fine. No problem at all. Upgrade now. So what's my opinion of this new update? Well, it's fine. I love the bug fixes. They are always welcome. I love new things for the Amiga, as you guys probably know. Is it a game changer? Not really. It's just a 0.1 update. Going from 3.1 to 3.14, game changer. Going from 3.14 to 3.2, game changer. The little incremental upgrades, not so much, but still really awesome. I really do like the attention to AREX that the developers are giving to this. They're not just giving up on it. AREX is such a powerful language, such an important thing that was done on the Amiga in the 90s. Just incredible what it could do. Passing information between programs in ways that PCs and Macs still can barely do. I hope the new improved icon edit gets people more involved in creating new icon sets. That would be really awesome if we had a couple really cool icon sets that were available that people did. My final analysis, upgrade to this if you have a 68020 or above. 68,000, wait a couple weeks. Let's see if the patches come out and they fix it. And I promise you, I'll let you know when they fix it. Huge thanks to my patrons who you see scrolling across the screen here over this lovely new Amiga OS 3.2 wallpaper. Oh, that gives me an idea. How about an Amiga OS wallpaper challenge on my Amiga artwork page? I bet we can come up with some awesome 4-color, 8-color, and 16-color images that won't tax the Amiga too much and fit within its color schemes. Now, pop on over to Facebook and take a look at my Amiga artwork page, and also pop on over to patreon.com/10mark if you'd like to sign up as a patron. Thanks, everybody. So thanks for joining me today on this quick little preview, introduction to 3.2.2. I really appreciate you stopping by. And please, buy the software. Don't pirate it. Don't be a jerk. Just don't. Please follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Mastodon, and wherever else I'm posting on. But until next time, this is Doug from 10 Minute Amiga Retrocast, signing out.